In autumn 1962, the ship left Southampton 37 berth to the cheers of Sir Vivian Fuchs, who, some 40 years after Shackleton's unsuccessful attempt to cross the Antarctic, was made successful on his 1957-58 adventure. For that he was knighted. Virtually my entire family turned up to wish me also bon voyage. Having left Southampton, we crossed the Bay of Biscay in heavy weather to arrive in Montevideo, Uruguay, where the ship was to undergo several modifications to its propellers. There I was able to take two girls who were serving me in the rough-looking pub outside the dock gates to see a fantastic musical, West Side Story. On arrival at the Falkland Islands, the ship was decked out for the Queen's birthday. Many of the Falkland Islanders made the trip onto the ship, sat in its hold, while we played Elvis Presley's new film, Blue Hawaii. Peeping from the sea. The Governor of Ireland, with his full plumed hat and his full military troop, came out to wish us well. We also were able to take the opportunity to play football against the local lads, supplemented by some of our own crew. And secondly, the races were held where the Islanders' local ponies were raced on the racetrack. You've come now onto the island of South Georgia, and on the headland in front of us you can see a white cross erected in memory of Sir Ernest Shackleton's ill-fated 1915-17 expedition to try to cross the Antarctic himself. The place where he landed, it's called Gripviken, a whaling station in South Georgia, which was where he came back to several years later in 1922, died of a heart attack and was buried in the graveyard there, in tribute to Sir Ernest Shackleton, first visited by Jeff Stockton in 1962 and again in 2017. The dogs were always left on chains in a big triangle, but they were friendly enough, and you would be allowed to actually take one, strap it to your wrist, and set off with a set of skis tied to your feet, where you would ski as far as you dare, and then lie down, shout to the dog, air or out, left or right, and the dog would bring you back with the instructions: we don't care if you die, do not let the dog off the leash, it'll go chasing penguins. This shot shows a particularly calm and pleasant evening as the ship enters down on its duties around in the northern parts of Antarctica. Here I'm stood at the site of an abandoned base with I'm the second cook on the ship, and I'm standing there with the second steward. We were ashore playing around, I guess. This is one of the bases where there was a tractor and everything was pulled up the bank, including, you'll notice, seal blood. Seal hunting was very much part of our duties because every base had husky dogs and therefore needed feeding. And what happened was that we would hunt the seals. They would be chopped into blocks. Of course, they were already frozen by the time you chopped them, and they would be fed to the dogs on their chains in the ice. This helicopter you see here, the Americans were operating in the same vicinity. Of course, they had everything, and they ran a ship called the Staten Island, quite a famous ship, and that carried its own helicopter. For us, we didn't have anything, not even a doctor. I can't remember his name, but he was a greaser for greasing engines. Here we have a picture of a really nice young sailor, a tough young lad. Only the British would do it. A post office which was a base, of course, but it was a designated British post office, and you could get the stamp if you wanted your stamps franked. I've got my full first day issue of stamps franked in Hope Bay, Graham Land, Antarctica. Only the British. Here the crew were on the stern of the ship, cutting through the ice. Here you can see the ship's shoreboat heading up through very thin ice, enough to make it difficult to cut through, but nevertheless we did get to shore that day. An incredible island called Deception Island, which is in fact the remains of a volcano, and the water was so hot you couldn't put your fingers in it. Pressed hard up against ice, being pushed around as the ship tries to make its way through thick ice. A beautiful sunset. Of course it's summer, so that's as dark as it would get, and even that's quite dark. Here you can see the seals successfully caught on an adjacent ice floe, gutted and being brought back onto the ship for feeding of huskies. There you can see us on an ice floe as we catch and hunt the seals. Beautiful calm seas as we glide through the water. This picture is particularly interesting. The politics of the Antarctic at that time were quite intense, and in 1962 we were told to actually stand by because of the Cuban crisis, where Khrushchev was facing off against Kennedy. We were told to stand by in case we had to leave the Antarctic and go north. It shows an Argentinian gunboat offering us assistance. We were stuck on a piece of ice on rock, and they were offering to pull us off. The captain of our ship, again as I've said before, a stickler for protocol, told the Argentinian Navy that a British flagship would not require the assistance of any Argentines, and therefore we wandered around on that piece of ice for a couple more days before we were able to release it. Ship at sunset. The ship had got itself stuck behind a very large iceberg. This perhaps is one of my favourite shots. You can see the great big piece of ice that had broken off in front of the ship, and again that shows how to overcome the problems we had to move everything up using husky dogs. This is an abandoned base that sometime had been used in one of the earlier expeditions. Here we're going down through a channel. You can see how close the steep the mountains are on either side of us, but there is in the background a narrow channel which we could get through. Here is a typical shot of just how vast and empty this place is. Mountains in the background in ice, in the foreground ice, a little bit of breakthrough probably caused by our ship, but nevertheless very, very barren and inhospitable. Here, this is an interesting shot. Young lad, young scientist, fresh out of university. He was on a 2-year stint, so there he is with his suitcase and his skis, and he'll be just about to set foot into his new life for the next couple of years. It was, by the time they got out, some of the boys were quite stir crazy. It was too long a stretch in totalization. That's a beautiful shot of the ship gliding with ice-covered decks, ice all around us. Again, it demonstrates the vastness of the place and just how beautiful, stunningly beautiful it is. That's us again, backed up in for the night. On Christmas Eve, we backed up into the island of Deception Island. The entrance is particularly difficult, and on the starboard side there was a wrecked whaler who'd got it wrong. I'm not quite sure what happened to the crew of the whaler, but there she was. The entrance is aptly named Neptune's Bellows, and the ship is still there. That sunken whaler is still there today, although the superstructure has disappeared. You only know that it's down there below in the sea. On my trip in 2017, having had a heart attack, I thought I would checked to see if they'd done a proper job on my heart, and in deception I stripped off to my knickers and dived in. Had I not come out, I'd have known my heart repair job was a failure. That's a particularly good shot. You can see clearly just how the ship cuts through the small, thick, small ice. Similar interesting shot with a really big iceberg floating away in the background, where you'd think you were on land, but that iceberg is on the move. We were asked to, I think for some museum or something in the UK, to bring back with us the head of a leopard seal. You can see we've skinned it, but for effect I think we've left its eyes in. Big and very, very powerful creatures, not to be messed with, leopard seals. And you can see finally my family greeted me as I returned. That's the card I sent home from Adelaide Island to my family, and arrived home before it arrived in May. Here's my wages slip, RRS Shackleton, G Stockton, monthly rate, I think it's 25 quid or something, 18 pound deductions. That was for beer and wine, or beer and whiskey. A lot of whiskey drunk down there. If you sent a telegraph, you were charged for it. Shows the ship breaking through ice. There were two sides to it, that ship, although there was only 23 on board in total, I think. There were the officers and there were the crew, and never will the two mix. The ship's captain, in the 8.5 months I spent, I think it was between 8 and 9 months on the ship, never spoke to me other than to issue an order or issue a reprimand. And that was the same, I would say, for most of the officers. You've quickly learned where you stood in the world. I think had the ship gone down, they would have saved the ship's cat before I. By royal decree, be it known to all and sundry that on the 22nd of October in the year 1962, Geoffrey Stockton crossed into my southern realm en route from Southampton to Antarctica, and did present himself for the purpose of paying forfeit due for trespass. This is to certify that he was duly shaved, bathed and induced to take the pill in my August Majesty's presence, and has the freedom to cross the equator without let or hindrance at any time of the day or night. This certificate is not transferable and must not be sold or pawned. Witnessed by our hand and seal, RRS Shackleton. For me, as a 17-year-old, it was a massive adventure, really hard work, 7 days a week, hard work, 12-hour, 14-hour days. But I wouldn't have missed it for the world, because it set me off on a life of non-stop adventure.